Hey, today we're going to take a look at something that I always loved growing up, and that's a monster magazine. This monster magazine itself I didn't own as a child for a reason that's going to be pretty obvious pretty quickly. But it's something I picked up in the meantime, and I think it's a fascinating example of a very much bygone era. Because while you can buy monster magazines or horror magazines today, much of what they were when I was growing up is completely gone. They're not for kids anymore, for one thing, which is a real shame because kids need an entryway into the genre. And they don't really cover monster movies anymore. At any chance, they'll put a slasher icon on the cover. And while you could say that Famous Monsters of Filmland, which is what we're covering today, was guilty of always putting a traditional Universal monster on the cover whenever they could, the difference I feel is that parents were willing to embrace the Universal monsters in a way that Jason and Freddy and Leatherface are still a little bit taboo for American families. Not much, and probably Freddy and Michael are probably safer than some others, but I don't know. My impression is that the Monster magazine was the most important gateway to becoming a hardcore horror fan, or at least monster movie fan of that era. The term monster kid definitely applies to me. I'm definitely a later monster kid because I was born in 1973. And that's a little bit late for the monster kid phenomenon, which is really pretty much a late 50s through the entire 60s phenomenon. Although you can be a monster kid at any age, and you can be a monster kid in any era. And I'm hoping there's a lot of them out there now, because I'd like nothing more than a renaissance of kids who are really into all horror films and not just like 5 franchises. I mentioned 1973 and my birthday for a reason, not just to point out that I'm 50 years old, but because the magazine we're covering today came out the month I was born. So this is Famous Monsters of Filmland, although Of Filmland is not on the cover of this issue. The 100th issue, which came out in August of 1973. The cover, of course, has, at that time, and I would argue probably still, horror's most important icon, which is Frankenstein. This is a painting, not a still, or at least it's a art on photograph, clearly meant to represent the original film's version. We still have scarring on the neck, for instance, and the bolts represent the first film. Famous Monsters of Filmland never made bones about the fact that they knew that they had become an institution by this point, and that they were the most important magazine in fandom. Forrest J. Ackerman, for Uncle Forey, always spoke directly to the fans, and so his entries, which are all throughout every issue, whether he's captioning a photo or this initial editorial, it was always addressed directly to the fans. It wasn't professorial. It wasn't talking in elaborate terms. It was like really just, "Hey, come around the campfire. I have a story to tell you." And I think that's brilliant and something we don't have with the current batch of horror magazines. The endless cool stills from Forey's collection, just amazing. And that's the thing. This guy cared personally. He wasn't just looking at press clippings and pulling out photos and regurgitating information. He actually knew this stuff as well as anyone could at the time. So, I mean, here's the thing. Lon Chaney Sr. was many, many years dead. He hadn't had a film made for, 40 years at this point, whatever. But he was still relevant to the Monster Kid because his enduring legacy in film mattered. and when I speak about the fact that because I watched movies primarily on black and white growing up, I didn't really have great instincts as far as when things came out, and it actually helped me love films that were older, which maybe I should have been a little bit less inclined to embrace. That really relates right back to these magazines, which, everything was in black and white. They couldn't pay for glossy pages except for the cover, so it wasn't exactly easy to tell what was supposed to be in my age group of horror films. These magazines also, I've noticed, have endured on page really well. Not the covers attached to the magazines themselves, but the insides are still so bright and have so much contrast. And this is a beat up, used copy. But look how great these stills and the text, look how crisp that text is. This is a magazine that's 50 years old, and it still looks tremendous. All these images as a kid were just electrifying. Horror seemed like such a vibrant, living thing. Of course, the magazine was always pushing itself, always selling itself. This is an early article telling you how, makeup was done. Fangoria made an entire cottage industry of that. But at the time, this was all very groundbreaking. The great Fay Wray. You asked for it was this section that was much shorter usually. It's much longer in this issue because of the special 100th issue, but where people could request photos from movies or actors or actresses to be published. And Forey could just literally go into his archives and find them because he had everything, Conrad Veidt. Barbara Steele. If you can't get the reverence that the magazine and Forey had for monster films and horror films and fantasy films, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it bleeds out of every page. He really loved this stuff. This issue has more photos than most, and that was kind of the selling point of an anniversary issue, right? But how extraordinary. This is amateur makeup. They ran a contest for amateur makeup artists to make masks, and this was the winner. And again, Forey directly talking to his readers. Now, this could have been that he just needed to fill pages, I mean, honestly, but he did so in such a way that made you feel like he was Uncle Forey. He was your guide on this journey, and he felt like family. By all accounts, one of the nicest people. You could literally knock on his door in California. He would answer and take you around the Acker Mansion, which was more of a museum. And you didn't need an invite, you could just show up and say you were a fan and you were going to be good taken care of. I don't know exactly when that ended. I know in his very later years he wasn't capable of doing that so much. But this guy was the real deal. This guy birthed an entire generation of fandom by himself and his magazines. When he was ultimately removed from Famous Monsters, and he went on to Monsterland and a few other projects, he tended to end up showing up in movies, in bit roles. But he'd show up, and it was like a Stan Lee cameo in a Marvel movie, really. And no monster magazine worth its salt can't have a Massive Frankenstein article, right? These stills, at the time, were precious, because this scene was not released to the public until video in the 80s, after its original release. So its existence was very much in question. The same way you say the piranha sequence from Cannibal Holocaust is always questioned. Was it actually filmed? People didn't know if the flower girl scene from Frankenstein was real or just something older guys talked about having seen. And in the 80s, we finally got to see it. And now we're getting to the part of all monster magazines that everyone loves the most, which is the endless ads for things that were being sold. One more article and then bam, here we are. This is all the back issues available. And then bam, we start to get all this cool stuff that you could buy. These are the monster kits. These are the Aurora kits. Doesn't make a big deal about what the kits were as far as branding. Today that would be all over the place. But back then it was just, hey, look, you can buy the Mummy. You can buy the Phantom of the Opera. Just all these cool ads. This is an ad for paperbacks. Really cool stuff. A lot of these go on eBay for ridiculous money now. Monster World had started. So this is interesting. This is pre-4E Monster World. 8mm prints of films that you could order. And if you look at the pricing on them, now $6.96 would have been probably about $30 today for the average kid. So this was not likely something you could do on the drop of a hat, but you could own these movies. This was the VHS revolution for a generation of kids, and they had to learn how to use a projector, how to store film. Although 8mm was really resilient, you didn't have to do much. Color was eventually going to fade, but most of these films were black and white, so you're probably good. Again, more hobby kits. Famous Monsters t-shirts. If you had one today, you could sell it on eBay for a couple $100. Books. All right. So here is something I think is really cool, and Fangoria borrowed the concept in the most basic way. This was just running photos of your readers. This is very much a fan magazine. It's a community. This is how much they wanted to build a community. And today, that's kind of what we've strived to do in the horror community online, is include people, let them have a voice. Read out comments or just acknowledge people in the chat. This is that 50 years ago. Look how young they were. And that's the point. There's something magical about kids just getting into horror. And so this is James Warden's letter congratulating 4E on 100 issues. And there we are, the 100th anniversary special issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Hope you've enjoyed this look at an issue that, while I didn't own at the time it came out, obviously, means a lot to me. I wish we had more heart in fandom. Less competition, less groupthink. Famous Monsters of Filmland for an entire generation and a long generation was the answer, the antidote to all the things that plague us right now. And while they did try to keep the magazine going several times in recent years, it has never meant what it meant back then, because there is no 4E Ackerman today. So do your best. Be as close to 4E as you can.